A pierced metal medal comes out of an Oak Island swamp honoring George Washington, and it carries the show straight back to the Masonic thread that's haunted this island for years. Gary Drayton lifts it from the muck of the North Swamp, and it isn't treasure and isn't a coin. It's a dark disc with a hole punched clean through the top. A coin lives in a purse. This was made to be threaded onto a ribbon and worn on a person's body. Once the team works out what it is, this little medal does something the gold and the iron never quite manage. It names the man it was made to honor, and it points straight at a thread the team has been chasing here for years. A disc with a hole through it. The North Swamp on Oak Island has a habit of giving up worked carried objects, things people made and handled and lost, and Gary Drayton, the team's metal detection expert, has pulled more than his share of them out of that ground.
This could be a golden opportunity for us.
On this day, he's working the swamp with Alex Lagina, Marty's son, when the signal comes up. The object that follows is small, dark, and badly weathered. Gary's first read is lead, then maybe a copper alloy or pewter. The metal matters less than the shape. It's round and flat, struck with an image, and pierced deliberately with a single hole at the top. That single hole tells you almost everything. You don't pierce money, you pierce something you mean to wear. And the moment you understand that, the object stops being a curiosity and becomes a clue about a person. Because somebody, at some point, hung this around their neck. What the team has learned the hard way is that the smallest objects often carry the most. A timber is impressive, but it's anonymous. A worn, pierced disc the size of a large coin can hand you a name, a year, and a reason, if you can read it. So it goes off for a closer look, and the team waits to see what the medal will say. The name in the medal. Then the identification lands, and it lands hard. This is a George Washington mourning medal.
This coin was made in the 1800s, a coin that is commemorating George Washington.
Made in 1800, the year after Washington died, when a young country buried the first man it had ever called president. He died on December 14th, 1799, and the grief that followed was nationwide and genuine. He wasn't just a politician, he was the figure the whole experiment of the country had been built around. And when he was gone, ordinary people wanted something to hold. The mourning ran on a scale the young country had never staged. Church bells tolled in towns that had never laid eyes on him. Congress draped its chamber in black, and a fellow officer eulogized him in words the whole country soon repeated. Out of that grief came a small industry of remembrance. Objects made so that people far from the funeral could carry a piece of the loss with them. So they made these. The medal in Gary's hand is what's known as the urn type, engraved by a man named Jacob Perkins, working out of Newburyport in New England. The picture on the back is a classical funerary urn, a symbol of mourning that reaches all the way back to the ancient world. And that urn was designed by Paul Revere. Yes, that Paul Revere, the same New England silversmith everyone knows from the Night Ride. Two figures of the early republic put their hands to a small token of national grief, and one of those tokens ended up in the mud of an Oak Island swamp hundreds of miles from where it was struck. Worn through the streets. Here's the detail that makes it personal. Each medal was pierced at the top exactly the way this one is, so it could hang on a ribbon and be worn around the neck. They were produced in a range of metals, even a few in gold. People bought them and wore them during the public memorial processions that swept through American towns in the early months of 1800. Mock funerals were staged in cities hundreds of miles from his grave. Empty coffins carried through the streets while crowds lined the route, and people pinned these medals to their coats, so the man they were marching for was, in a small way, present. This wasn't a plaque to hang on a wall. It was a thing you put on your body and walked with in a crowd, in grief. Which means the question is no longer what it is, it's who carried it here. A national grief token engraved in New England did not wander into a Nova Scotia swamp on its own. Someone brought it, and the man that someone was mourning is exactly where the deeper thread begins. The brotherhood behind it. George Washington was a Freemason. That's documented, not a stretch. One of the most famous Masons in American history, sworn into a Virginia lodge as a young man, and a member for the rest of his life. When he died, his own funeral was conducted with Masonic rites, his brethren laying him to rest with the rituals of the order. Mourning tokens were worn by Freemasons at memorial services, a brotherhood honoring one of its own. So the medal sits at a meeting point. It honors the country's lost president, and it honors a fellow member of an order that has shadowed the Oak Island mystery for as long as anyone has been digging here. Think about who would have owned one. Not just anyone wandering past, but a person who cared enough to buy a memorial token and wear it in public during a procession of mourning. That's someone with means, with allegiance, with a reason to grieve this particular man in this particular way. The medal carries intention. Somebody chose it. Freemasonry is not a new note on this island. The show has circled it for years. The symbols, the traditions, the persistent suggestion that whoever engineered the works on Oak Island may have moved in those same secretive, ritual-bound circles. Over the seasons, the team has turned up markings that read as Masonic to the people studying them, and more than one expert has argued that the engineering of the original workings looks like the hand of people trained to keep a secret. So when a medal surfaces that honors a man who was himself a Freemason, worn by the kind of people who carried these to lodge memorials, it brushes up against the oldest and most stubborn thread in the whole mystery. The date that lands hard. And the date makes that brush land even harder. 1800 drops this object into a very specific and very early window. The organized treasure hunt on Oak Island is usually traced back to the discovery of the money pit around 1795. So a medal made in 1800 wasn't lost here in some hazy later century. It belongs to the first years of the search itself. Someone from New England stood on the Oak Island in the opening handful of years of the treasure hunt, wearing around their neck the face of the man America had just lost. That's not a vague colonial presence. That's a person, a region, and a date. And it sharpens a question the island never stops asking. The earliest years of the search are also its haziest, the records thin, and the names few. An object dated to within a few years of the search's start is rare enough to earn real attention because it speaks for a moment the written record barely covers. 2 medals, 1 distinction. But the medal itself insists on a distinction, and it's a real one. There were 2 different mourning medals made in that wave of grief, for 2 different processions. The urn type, the one Gary pulled from the swamp, was tied to the Great Civic Memorial Procession on February 22nd, 1800, Washington's birthday, when towns across the country marched in public mourning. There was also a separate design, marked with skull and crossbones imagery, made for the Masonic funeral procession held earlier, on February 11th. The piece in the ground here is the civic one, the urn, the medal of the public rather than the medal of the lodge. So the Masonic connection doesn't run through the artifact's own design. It runs through the man. It runs through who Washington was and who wore tokens like this, and the long Masonic thread the show has been pulling on this island for years. Not a symbol stamped into metal, but a human being who stood here with a famous man's memory hanging at their throat. What a lost token can tell. There's a second piece of honesty the object demands. A pierced, wearable token is the easiest thing in the world to lose. A ribbon frays, a knot slips, and the metal falls into the swamp and is gone, with no plan behind it. So it doesn't come with a vault or a map or a buried chest attached. What it comes with is a presence and a date, and the show is straight that this is where the hard evidence stops and the questions begin. Whether the person who wore it was here to dig, to scout, to settle, or simply to pass through, the medal can't say. The rest is the question it opens. Why a name and a date are enough. So what does that leave us with? And is a name and a date enough to matter on an island that's been promising gold for 2 centuries? It is. And it might be exactly the kind of evidence this island has always needed more of. Look at what the medal fixes in place. A dateable American object made in 1800, engraved by a known New England hand, with a reverse designed by one of the most recognizable figures of the early republic, pierced to be worn, which means carried, which means a person, and it honors a Freemason at the precise moment the country was in mourning. Stack those together, and you don't get a fantasy about secret societies burying treasure by torchlight. You get something solid, a specific person from a specific region, standing on this island in the earliest years of the search, with a real brush against the Masonic thread carried by the man, not the medal. That's worth sitting with because of how rare it is here. Most of what comes out of this ground is hard to date and harder still to attach to a human being. A mourning medal is almost the opposite kind of evidence made in a known place in a known year for a known purpose, by people whose names we still say out loud. The uncertainty isn't in the object, it's in everything around it. The who and the why and the what were they doing here. And that's the right place for it to live. And this isn't the only small, dateable object the team has tied to a famous name and a precise moment. Not long before the medal, they pulled a worn silver coin out of the ground and traced it back to the Royal Mint's Great Recoinage, England's wholesale remaking of its money, a single object that pinned the island to a documented monetary reform with one of history's most famous names attached. 2 tiny finds, 2 precise dates, one honoring a dead president in 1800, the other reaching a full century further back. If you want to see the other one, the worn silver coin traced back to that recoinage and just how far the thread reaches, that's the one to watch next.